Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon before you begin your weekends. Here we are over 6 months into the pandemic. COVID has definitely brought uncertainty and change to development organizations. Arguably, our work is more critical than ever, yet stable, predictable funding from governments and other institutions remains aloof. Our panel today will look beyond our current parameters to examine what new and innovative funding mechanisms are emerging and what gaps they can fill in our ecosystem. We'll begin our session with a presentation. We'll do 2 back-to-back presentations from both organizations, providing an overview of their innovative funding mechanisms. And as Ruby said, the remainder of the session will be a Q&A from the audience. So we really encourage you to jot down your questions and your notes. We want this to be a very interactive session and for you to leave today going home with a bunch of new knowledge. So I will begin today by introducing our first panelist, Christina MacIsaac, Director of Innovation at Fund for Innovation and Transformation, or FIT. Christina, FIT is a new national initiative of the ICN that supports Canadian SMOs to test innovative solutions that will advance gender equality in the Global South. Christina brings a wealth of experience to her role. Prior to FIT, she worked in community investment with a global insurance company and engaged extensively with the charitable sector across Canada on issues ranging from psychological health and well-being to social responsibility and sustainability. A past participant of Canada World Youth, Christina is thrilled to engage with the international development sector on this initiative with the support of a very enthusiastic team. Christina, would you like to begin your presentation? Wonderful.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Danielle. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay, good, thanks. So maybe before we get started, I did want to acknowledge that the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation and FIT are meeting on Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. It's a real pleasure to be here today in the company of Danielle and Anne and Doug. I certainly hope we can impart you with maybe a nugget of information after today, and I'm really looking forward to learning from this panel as well. Today we'll provide maybe just a general overview of FIT, some context and parameters about the fund and how we might fit into the landscape, as well as a few examples of some innovative solutions that we're funding. And maybe an overarching question that we were thinking about in preparation for today, and something I would toss out to participants for consideration, is whether innovation is something SMOs need to be thinking about for current and future work, especially in light of the pandemic. So while you're thinking about this question, I'll get started on the slides and hit you with some other information. As Danielle mentioned, the Fund for Innovation and Transformation is a new national funding and learning program designed to support Canadian small and medium-sized organizations wanting to test innovative solutions in the Global South to advance gender equality. We're an initiative of the Intercouncil Network of Provincial and Regional Councils, of course, of which ACGC is one of them, and we're funded through Global Affairs Canada. FIT is, fairly unique because our fund supports SMOs specifically at the testing phase of an innovation idea within a short time frame to allow SMOs to learn, adapt in a supportive environment. And integrating and promoting gender equality is a central focus of FIT. So innovative solutions must seek to address gender equality issues and/or empower women and girls and the poorest and most vulnerable communities. Another important component of FIT is that our focus is on learning and capacity building. So funded SMOs are invited to be a part of a community of practice. They can receive one-on-one mentoring from staff based on their needs, and FIT develops learning resources based on the common needs of the group and then shares these stories with the broader community on our website and in other forums. So, some context around the program. In May 2017, the Minister of International Cooperation announced $100 million in funding for small and medium-sized organizations. And this funding aims to support innovative programs related to key government priorities, notably the empowerment of women and girls and the FIAP. It's to provide predictability and transparency and access to funding that small and medium-sized organizations have been looking for, and to reinforce the ability of Canadian organizations to deliver better and more sustainable development results through capacity building. So there's 3 windows that came out of this funding. The first is the Development Impact Fund managed by Global Affairs. The second is FIT, managed out of the Manitoba Council. And the third window is Spur Change, managed out of ACGC, which focuses on capacity building and engagement. So innovation, gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls are global priorities, and the commitments noted in the Sustainable Development Goals. Innovation development is also a cornerstone of the FIAP, and it's considered essential to achieving the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, because innovations offer new ways to work smarter, more effectively and efficiently for better results and greater impact. FIT aligns with Canada's international assistance priorities to reduce poverty, advance gender equality, and empower women and girls in the Global South. And FIT also directly contributes to GAC's commitment to advancing development innovation and evidence to development practice. So all of this to say that FIT is closely aligned with national and global priorities, and the program is filling an important gap by supporting SMOs to test and to gather evidence. So, what is development innovation? As described by GAC, it's a process, a mindset, and a means to enable new and improved locally driven solutions for better results and greater impact, which benefit and empower the poorest and the most vulnerable, including women and girls. So we put some examples of, kinds of innovations out here, but innovation solutions or innovative solutions do must include inclusive opportunities for local communities, from solution conception to execution. So for example, women and girls or marginalized groups are an important part in testing design, approach, adoption of ideas or solutions. So what do we mean by testing innovative solutions, and how is FIT perhaps different from other funds, including innovation funds? So we've put a graphic on the slide to illustrate this, and if you're familiar with our program, you've probably seen it. But essentially, your innovative solution needs to be at the proof of concept stage. And so when you've already developed your solution to a problem, and hopefully with added insight and expertise from the beneficiaries the innovation hopes to impact, you are aware of what other solutions exist to help address the problem. You've done your research and development, and you've created a sample of your product or your program. And innovation and scaling stages noted on this slide are fluid. So you move in and out of these stages as your solution evolves. But having said this, and maybe for purposes of understanding FIT, program requirements, an innovative solution is ideally at the point where it requires funding to test in a gender-sensitive way. So we have some similarities and differences, to other innovation funds. And I'm certainly not an expert on the other funds, but some of these funds support traditional development projects for longer terms with more funding. Some others support testing and partner with different organizations to scale projects. Some target much bolder and broader innovation ideas than what we're doing, and some even provide coaching and mentoring. I would say the key ingredient is that funding entities are looking for unique ideas to test and potentially scale, thoughtful approaches, inclusive design, so that there can be sustainable solutions. So where is FIT now as a program? Just, you know, we launched in May 2019. We've gone through 2 intakes and now have 18 SMOs selected and being funded, including 3 from Alberta, and one of which I can't put on the slide because it will be announced next week, hopefully, so stay tuned. The SMOs certainly that we are funding all, you know, represent a range of organizations and different kinds of innovations to address challenges related to, you know, agriculture, health, education, safety and technology, you know, including a digital database used to improve the safety of women journalists in Sudan, the distribution model of solar chicken egg incubators in Zambia, and the introduction of self-sampling methods for cervical cancer screening in rural India, just to name a few. And if we look at some stories from Alberta, so I'd love to just highlight a couple since this is an ACGC event. Both Change for Children Association and Embrace International Foundation are testing technology-related projects in the field of education, each of them with a bit of a different twist. And so just briefly, Change for Children is testing, you know, a new training program and digital resource database for teachers in remote Indigenous communities in Nicaragua. The offline technology incorporates language and culturally appropriate pedagogy to determine the impact on teacher capacity, classroom resources, and quality of instruction, as well as gender equality. And Embrace is testing a new approach to self-directed e-learning through mobile learning labs in communities where there is no access to learning resources outside of school, and this is in rural Uganda. And so the test aims to empower and improve the lives of young students, especially girls and those living with disabilities, by promoting skills development and improving enrollment rates. So these are just a couple of examples of SMOs testing simple but very unique approaches in their respective communities. And in terms of, you know, challenges and lessons learned so far, I think it's important to highlight that all of the SMOs, and certainly from our first intake, were quickly faced with the challenge of adapting to, you know, the global pandemic. And so speaking in the big picture, we know that COVID-19 will intensify inequalities for women and girls and vulnerable people in particular, which highlights the need for innovation funding to advance gender equality in the global south. So in conclusion, the essence of FIT is to fund organizations that are testing and adapting in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Innovation is probably no longer an optional approach to sustainable development, but has become quite necessary. Innovation is relevant, it's pertinent, and the funding mechanisms to support capacity building of organizations doing impactful work is critical. So to close, we just wanted to mention that FIT is currently accepting concept notes for a third intake, and I think we close officially on October the 15th. So you can find more information about our requirements and the work of the innovators and explore our resources on the website or on social media. And you know, we also have a few upcoming events, including a workshop with Spur Change on October 14th. We'll provide some more information about incorporating gender as you develop your funding application, but also incorporating gender in experimental or innovation environments. And that is it.
Thank you, Christina. And great learning about a couple of Alberta organizations that have received funding through the FIT program. I'll now introduce our next 2 presenters. So they'll be doing 2 back-to-back presentations, building off one another. Anne Delorme, the Fund Director at Act Together for Inclusion Fund, ACTIF with Equitas. She joined the team in 2020. And Anne holds an MBA from McGill's Faculty of Management and has 20 years of experience managing complex development programs and teams in international NGOs, national and multilateral development agencies, including the United Nations Development Program. A thought leader in the promotion of gender equality, her approach is deeply informed by a long history of working with international rights-based organizations, networks, and social movements. During her tenure as coordinator of the AQOCI, I am not going to attempt to practice my French this afternoon, apologies, and successfully influenced a network of organizations to meaningfully integrate intersectional approaches to gender equality and inclusion in their programs and institutions. Anne is the author of several publications on feminist approaches to international development and a seasoned public speaker at the United Nations and other international forums. She is also co-chair of the advisory committee of the CCIC Digna Initiative on Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. And our second presenter is Doug Kerr, the Executive Director of Dignity Network Canada. Doug is originally from Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory, and has made Toronto, Ontario home since 1996. Dignity Network Canada is a national coalition of 40 organizations interested in advancing the human rights of LGBTIQ people globally. Over the past 5 years, he has worked closely with civil society organizations and Global Affairs Canada to launch Canada's first major international LGBTIQ funding initiative, a $30 million set of programs to be launched in 2020 and 2021. In addition to running his own nonprofit management consulting practice for over a decade, Doug has taught nonprofit strategy at the University of Toronto and international social justice at Centennial College in Toronto. Doug has a BA from the University of Alberta in International Relations and Chinese Studies and an MSW from the University of Toronto. He has a certificate from Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity in International Law program from Leiden University in The Hague, the Netherlands. A longtime LGBTIQ activist and community organizer, he was a recipient of the Queen Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012 and Steinert and Furio Award in 2016. He and his husband Michael are co-owners of Glad Day Bookshop, the oldest LGBTQ2S bookstore in the world, and are also very proud parents of 9-year-old Malaki. Welcome, Doug and Anne. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll get your presentations up and you can begin.
Okay, hi, Michelle. Thank you. So I've only got one slide and it doesn't come till a little bit later. So thank you very much. So thanks for inviting me. My name is Doug Kerr. And first of all, while I live in Toronto now, as Michelle said, I'm a born and bred Albertan on Treaty 6 territory, and I went to U of A. So I'm really happy to be speaking to all of you this afternoon. And I'm hoping that our story can get you thinking a little bit about innovation, about diversity, intersectionality, and solidarity in funding international cooperation today. So as Michelle said, I'm from a coalition of organizations across Canada who are interested in and work on the global solidarity movement for human rights for LGBTI people. And that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex people. We use the term LGBTI, it's a United Nations term. In Canada, sometimes we say Two-Spirit and LGBTI to recognize the Two-Spirit Indigenous communities. What's really interesting about this story is that it really is about a group of individuals, community organizations, and activists, most of whom actually have very little connection to traditional international development sector, who believe that strongly that Canada has an important role to play in the 2020s in the advancement of gender equality, diversity, and human rights. So I want to just give a little bit of context as well for everybody. So LGBTI people often face discrimination and marginalization everywhere in the world, including here at home in Canada, for their sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics, or SOGIESC is the acronym. However, in much of the world today, still, LGBTI people are often criminalized or are victims of state-sponsored or general public persecution. And that, you know, and there are in many parts of the world grassroots human rights defenders and organizations that are working to protect LGBTI people and advance their rights. So, you know, for people like myself, as a gay man who came out in Alberta in the late 80s and early 90s, you know, who worked on LGBT issues my whole life, I'm connected to and part of these global movements. So about 6 or 7 years ago, you know, there was a wave of anti-LGBTI persecution and legislation that swept across a number of countries, in particular Russia, Chechnya, Uganda, and that were in the news a lot. And a number of individuals and activists here in Canada, some working in international development organizations, and many who are working just in the community in other facets of their life, came together with international activists at a global human rights conference here in Toronto in 2014, connected to World Pride. And at that time, a number of these activists from Russia, from Uganda, especially Uganda in particular, said, we get support from a number of countries: Sweden, the Netherlands, the United States, the UK, and we don't really get anything from Canada. And that's by support, they meant through the embassies or quiet diplomacy at the United Nations, or other funding, international development funding. So a group of us Canadians, along with some non-Canadians, our colleagues and friends from a number of countries, created a set of recommendations to the federal government, the new federal government in 2015, that outlined ways that Canada could, through its diplomacy, its foreign affairs, international development assistance, and refugee policy, could actually be more of a global actor in supporting the human rights of LGBTI people. So after the change of the government in 2015, that there was a more of a door open for this conversation. And we were very successful in getting Canada to be more engaged at international fora. Canada became the co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition, which is a global coalition of states that work on these issues. Canada finally joined the United Nations core group on LGBTI issues. But what was really slow to change was the integration of sexual gender diversity in development assistance. And we really struggled for that for a number of years. We did some research in 2017, and we found that of Canada's total international development budget, only 0.04% went to anything related to LGBTI, 0.04%, about $2 million, mostly through some embassy funding. And so that compared to some other countries like the Netherlands or Sweden, where $20 to $40 million a year was going out to support the global movement. So I won't get into the details of the minutiae of how we really advocated with GAC and around inclusion, but our basic argument was this: if Canada is going to have a feminist international assistance policy, and homophobia, transphobia are wrapped up with misogyny and sexism, if Canada is a country that supports LGBTI human rights and says that, it has to be part of Canada's portfolio of funding. We said to the feds, you can't say you support LGBTIQ2 people and just march in pride parades and put rainbow flags up. We said that have to be reflected in our foreign policy, including international assistance. So ultimately, by 2018, we emerged as a network of about a dozen organizations called Dignity Network, and we've now grown to about 40, who sat down with staff at GAC to work out a model of what this could look like. And in 2019, in February, so about a year and a half ago, GAC announced a new funding program. It doesn't have a name other than just LGBTIQ2 initiatives of $30 million over 5 years. Can you put up the slide for a moment? Because I think it's just important for people just to see the different components of it. No. So there's $30 million. The first piece of the funding, Anne is going to talk about in more detail. And I'll let her talk to that, and it's focused on Canadian organizations. The second piece of funding is a $15 million, which we are currently working with GAC around, and it's called the geographic window, and we're not sure exactly how it will go out, but it may be in partnership with regional NGOs across the world that work in different regions. And finally, there's $5 million for a global partnership window, which is essentially Canadian contribution to existing multilateral funds that are being set up by other governments to support global LGBTI human rights. So Anne's going to talk about the $10.3 million in grants for Canadian LGBTIQ organizations. So you can take down the slide. I should just add, it's not on the slide, GAC expressed a strong interest in developing a community of practice on SOGIEC issues with civil society. So our hope is that over the next decade, LGBTI issues become integrated across programs and not just so innovative. But at the moment, it's very innovative. My last thing I'm going to say is just how the work will go going forward. So, in the development of this $30 million set of initiatives, GAC started talking about what they call a human rights-based approach. And for them, they started to talk about it as if it was something new. I was really, okay, you don't have a human rights-based approach already, but we're still exploring what it means in practice. But to date, what it's meant is that GAC has been closely engaging with us around the design of the programs, ongoing consultation, investment in capacity building, and building trust between civil society and GAC, and creating, hopefully, working towards creating a community of practice. So we're still really in early days. None of the money is actually moved out. But I'll turn it over to Anne. And just a plug for the network, we have one member organization in Alberta. It'd be great to have more, and I can talk more about that later. So over to Anne.
Thanks, Doug. And you know what's great is that you talked about human rights-based approaches just before you passed me the mic, and of course I'm here now as the director of the ACTIF Fund, but for ACTIF, who is an organization that has a very strong human rights-based approach, and that's been part of what they've been doing for 50 years. They're one of the few organizations in Canada that has worked on human rights in such a dedicated way and for so long and so deeply. ACTIF's unique approach aims to advance equality, social justice, and respect for human dignity through a transformative human rights education programs, both in Canada and in the world. Part of that approach is about values based on equality and non-discrimination, meaningful participation, and mutual trust. And we base ourselves on our network of over 6,000 human rights defenders around the world. ACTIF also, prior to getting funding for ACTIF in collaboration with the Dignity Network, had a significant track record implementing programming with strong focus on LGBTQ2I rights internationally, including in Haiti and East Africa, just to name a few examples. So I've got maybe 5 minutes to present ACTIF, and luckily we are at the very beginning of the ACTIF Fund, so there isn't that much to present just yet, although a tremendous amount of work went into making this funding available today, which is why Doug's presentation was so important to help understand the background to what enabled the ACTIF Fund to be. So it is innovative in itself, and it meets an important gap in current funding for LGBTQ2I rights internationally. There is too little funding, and even less so from Canada, as Doug mentioned. So ACTIF is funded by Global Affairs Canada, it is managed by ACTIF, and it is in collaboration with the Dignity Network Canada. ACTIF, or Act Together for Inclusion Fund, its main goal and its purpose is to advance the human rights and socioeconomic outcomes for LGBTQ2I persons in the Global South, or more specifically, countries eligible for overseas development assistance. Much like ACTIF, the fund is guided by principles of intersectionality, inclusion, human rights, and do no harm. It's unique also in its structure. So ACTIF is kind of like FIT, actually, is funding Canadian organizations who will partner with organizations in the Global South. So Canadian organizations with a track record of working on LGBTQ2I issues and establish connections to local LGBTQ2I CSOs and movements in the Global South. So we want to see this partnership between Canadian organizations and Southern organizations in the grantees that will be receiving funding. As Doug mentioned, there's $10.3 million available for disbursements to Canadian CSOs, but the project in itself, or the fund ACTIF, is a $17 million envelope over 7 years. We're really excited. As I said, I started about a month ago. We're really excited about this fund and the potential that it can bring forth. We really would like to have a call for proposals in 2020, 2021. But as those of you who have worked with Global Affairs Canada know, there's important steps for due diligence and development of the program, which are also occurring this year. So there's a few challenges for us to work together to be able to offer this funding in this fiscal year, but the hope is there. I also wanted to touch a little bit on our model. We would like to have a participatory grant making model for the ACTIF Fund. So this means that we are trying to put into practice certain feminist principles, like those of nothing about us without us, or that the process is just as important as the results. So together, Dignity Network and ACTIF have been working to soon establish an international advisory committee made up of 10 individuals with lived experience, skills, and expertise in LGBTQ2I related international grant making projects. We would like them to be able to provide advice, oversight, and guidance. And we'll also have a selection committee that will be responsible for making decisions around the fund's applications. And as I mentioned, the importance of these two committees is to have deep experience and lived experience in LGBTQ2I human rights work globally. Danielle, you can signal to me if we are short on time, and I'll be sure to be brief. So part of this participatory approach is also to ensure that we're constantly learning to improve the grant making process. This is a new field as well for ACTIF. ACTIF has not traditionally administered funds, and we want to ensure that we're constantly improving and learning from the process so that we're meeting the needs and the priorities of both Canadian organizations and LGBTQ2I organizations in the Global South. So that means that we are very careful about these principles, how we put into practice these principles of inclusion. So specifically, we would like to ensure that there is intention and care that groups that experience the greatest marginalization within the broader LGBTQ2I community have access to the benefits of the fund. Current evidence demonstrates that lesbian, bisexual, intersex, trans, and two-spirited people often have less structured organizations and therefore greater difficulty accessing funding. And for this reason, we would like to pay special attention to developing inclusive processes and mechanisms that ensure equitable access to the benefits of the fund and associated opportunities for capacity building and knowledge sharing. So some of you may be curious about the criteria that's going to be used for those that will eventually be able to submit applications and receive funding from ACTIF Fund. The full criteria is still being developed. We're going to do that in consultation with our advisory committee. But of course, there'll be a piece around the Canadian capacity, or the capacity of the Canadian organizations, their credibility in terms of their track record working on LGBTQ2I issues, and the participation of LGBTQ2I persons in project design and delivery. Also, the capacity of the southern partners that will be part of the project, and where their voice is in determining priorities and the needs that the project will meet. So this is very important in terms of our key criteria, but of course that needs to be refined over time. 1 minute. And so, as I just mentioned, ACTIF is looking to support projects developed by Canadian organizations, but these projects need to be developed with their partners in the South. There's a broad cross-section of activities that can be included because it's looking to advance the human rights of LGBTQ2I people and the socioeconomic outcomes. So there's a pretty wide range of what can go into what can be fundable within that. Maybe one last point, and this is key to the partnership between Dignity Network Canada and ACTIF, is that there's a strong capacity building component, much like FIT, that is built into the program. So ACTIF will make available knowledge sharing, capacity building, and training initiatives so that grantees and non-grantees can share best practices and learn together and co-create knowledge. I think that's really an important piece. We will be looking to build the capacity both of our grantees or recipient organizations and project management, and in particular for ACTIF, how to better put in practice a human rights-based approach into programming. So I may have forgotten something. As I said, I'm new to ACTIF and to ACTIF, but I'm so pleased to have Doug here on the panel with me, where he will surely help me answer some of the many questions that are to come.